Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm sure people must be watching this presentation from around the world. My name is Akanksha and I'll be taking this introductory class on Selenium. So today I'm going to cover Selenium, and if I go to the next slide, these are the topics that I'm going to cover today. So I'll quickly go through the slide. Challenges with manual testing, how automation testing beats manual testing, Selenium as an automation testing tool, advantages and disadvantages of Selenium, Selenium versus other tools, Selenium suite of tools as in all the components of Selenium, IDE, RC, Grid, and WebDriver. Hands-on, so we'll be having a use case wherein I'll quickly demonstrate what you can achieve using Selenium WebDriver. So we'll set up environment for the same, and then we'll have some example for that for any web application. Probably we'll take Edureka as an example. All right, so you all must be aware of manual testing because when it comes to attending a course related to automation testing, I've seen that mostly people from manual testing background or those who had automation testing background as well, but they've used other tools like QTP and stuff, they usually take this course. I'll tell you in brief about myself. I've been a developer for 5 years in the beginning of my career, and then I switched to automation testing because I got a chance once to work on automation scripts and I thoroughly loved the work. So that was the time I decided that I'll be completely switching to automation testing. So why is the slide written? You must be aware of manual testing because see, the base is very important. You have to have your manual testing concepts very clear because automation is again automating your manual testing. So the concepts will remain there, they'll remain intact, we'll be just automating them. Okay, so that's a funny slide, and you can see that on the left hand side we've got this registration form with the where sign up fields like username, password, name, address, country, email, sex, language, and then we have to submit it. And there's this poor guy who's working on this web application. He's probably loading these transactions manually and he's all sweat. So if you see here, testing web apps manually involves loading all transactions, downloading those transactions, creating pass-fail reports for each of them, validating the form, taking screenshots for each validation. Poor guy. I'm assuming, let's say he has to do 100 transactions or maybe 1,000 transactions. Can you just imagine his life? Okay, so this is what he's thinking. It's boring, it's time consuming, it's tedious, and there's a tendency to make mistakes and errors because to err is human. And if somebody has to do 100 plus or 1,000 plus transactions, believe me, even I will tend to insert a mistake. Anybody would tend to insert a mistake. So now let's see how automation testing will take over manual testing. Automation testing beats manual testing. And this guy is all smile now. So if you look here, it says automated execution through test scripts. So there's a complete hub of systems, auto generation of result file. So we are maintaining all the result files somewhere, and then auto generation of reports. So we've got these auto generated reports also. So that's the beauty of automation. See, automation is a whole concept in itself. If you talk about which application to automate or how to automate the application. So if this question comes up, I would first ask, so that'll be my cross question, whether I can automate this application or not. What kind of application is it? So the first point is to understand whether we can automate this web application or not. If it is fine to automate that application, then comes this slide. Okay, he has automated all the test cases using test scripts. He's created an automated test suite. We've got multiple systems here in this slide. All right, and then we are getting auto-generated result files. That's what we can do. We can automate the result generation as well. And then we can maintain the result files at a particular location. And then we can also auto-generate the reports as well. So when we'll go through this entire course curriculum, you'll get to know how to do this. When we'll reach framework part, you'll come to know how we can automate this entire process of auto-generating the result files and also creating the reports. Automation testing beats manual testing. So these are the points how they beat manual testing. Faster execution, more accurate, lesser investment in human resources, supports regression testing, frequent executions, supports light out execution. So let's understand all these points in detail. Faster execution. Now we need to understand why is it faster. So you all will think that okay, that's the script and we'll just run the script, and that's absolutely correct. But we also need to understand that writing that script takes time. Only the execution of that script is faster. So no doubt the effort put in initially into creating the automation test suite is huge. But looking at the long-term effect of creating that automation test suite is so beautiful that we tend to overlook the effort that has been put in initially. Faster execution. So we've got the steps which are already written inside the script. We just need to run the script and we'll get the result. That's the reason fast execution. More accurate. Why is it more accurate? Because whatever we write inside the scripts, they're predefined. As in, I already know that what is my test case and what do I want to achieve? What should the result be? What is the expected result? So when I'll create my test script, I will also test my test script for its accuracy, and then I'll test the test script for the result as well, which I want to achieve. So that's already been tested in itself so much that of course we can believe on the result it's going to give us. Whereas with manual, let's say I have to do 100 transactions. Same thing. If you go back to the same slide, I have to do the same transaction for the 100th time. Now for 99 times, I didn't make any mistake, but I got so bored. I got so bored doing the same thing again and again. But here, I have to just run the script. And those steps need not be executed manually. It's a script and I just have to run it. Those pre-recorded steps. So that's more accurate for obvious reasons. Lesser investment in human resource. Now, if we talk about manual testing and if we talk about our different companies, okay, I've been into corporate as well. So if you talk about your manual testing team, the strength would be minimum 4 people, 4 resources, and maximum can be anything depending on the project size. Now, if I've got minimum 4 resources also, I'll have to bring them from some other project or I'll have to maybe, hire them. So I'll be investing money in those resources. Whereas with automation, I need 1 or 2 resources to create that automation test suite. Because when it comes to running that suite, we don't need any special expertise. That person just needs to know a few steps to run that automation test suite. So obviously there's less investment in human resources. So we're saving on money as well. Time we already know because that's fast execution. So we're saving on time and we're saving on money as well. Supports regression testing. Now let's understand what regression testing is first, and then we'll see how it supports regression testing. Now, regression testing, when I ask my students what is regression testing, they come up with different answers. As in the crux is same, almost same, but yes, of course, different answers. So regression testing, or let's say regression test suite, it's a set of test cases which will always be there. And those test cases were written keeping in mind that these test cases will test the major functionality of the application. We want to check the major flow or major functions or major components of that application. So that's how that regression test suite is created, having major test cases. Now, when it comes to regression testing, it means whenever there's a bug fix, or let's say whenever there's an enhancement, I have to run that set of test cases again because that is testing the major functionality or major components of the application. And with any bug fix or with any enhancement, I don't want that functionality to be broken. So these test cases will remain there always. And whenever I'll get a fix, I'll run this suite. Now, One more point to add, because I don't want you to misunderstand things. When it comes to enhancement, enhancement is a new feature. So if any new feature is getting added to your application, so don't think that you can't add more test cases to your regression test suite. You can add test cases to your regression test suite, and you can remove test cases from your regression test suite. But the point is, it will always have a fixed number, not a fixed actually, but certain test cases that is testing the major functionality or the major call flow, you can say, of your application. So now let's say I'm working on some application and there's a sprint that is running. So I'm working in agile mode, okay? And it's a 15-day sprint. And those who don't understand agile, let's say I've got some work and I have to finish that work, okay, in 15 days. And that work is to do the testing, and the developers or the development team, they'll fix the bugs. So now if I've got a bug fix today, I'll have to insert that fix in my application. I'll get a new build, and then I have to run this entire regression test suite on that new build. Now let's say during these 15 days, I've got bug fixes for 10 times. That means that I have to run this regression test suite 10 times manually. And this regression test suite can have any number of test cases, believe me, depending on your application. It could be 100, 150, 200, 250, 300, any number of test cases. Now, if I have to do that manually again and again the same thing happens. You'll tend to get more bored, you'll tend to insert mistakes, or you'll tend to miss a few steps. What if I automate this entire thing? Because that's something I'm going to run again and again with every bug fix. So why not automate it? But mind you guys, when it comes to automation, the first thing that you should always think is whether it is feasible to automate it or not. Okay? Only when it is feasible to automate the web application, then comes the point of automating it. Okay? So don't misunderstand this, that you can automate anything if that has repeated tasks to do. No, that cannot be done. We first need to come down to this point that whether we can automate it or not. All right? Frequent execution. Again, these 2 points are interrelated. If I have to run a test suite, which is going to take a few seconds or maybe just a few minutes to complete the entire test suite, obviously, even if I'm getting billed for, let's say, virtually any number of times in a day, I can run this automation test suite because that's going to take just a few seconds or maybe a few minutes. So frequent execution of the automation test suite. Supports lights out execution. Now this terminology is technical, which means that even if you're not physically present in front of this testing happening, it will happen anyway. With manual testing, you have to do it manually, but with automation, you just have to run the test suite. So even if you're not there, maybe you're attending some important meeting or you're running some, some very important test case, which is a different thing altogether, or maybe you're working on some different project. So this is the power of automation. You don't have to be manually there, physically there. You're saving on time. You're saving on money. So many things you can achieve. Let's go to the next slide now. Selenium as an automation testing tool. Now, there are a number of tools that are being used in the market. Selenium is taking over all of them, believe me. So there are certain features or certain plus points, positive points of Selenium, which is, making it dominant over other tools in the market. Selenium is a suite of software tools to automate web browsers. It is open source and mainly used for functional testing and automation testing. It's a suite of software tools to automate web browsers. Now, if you say Selenium is a suite of software tools, basically we're talking about Selenium as a whole. So you must have already heard that Selenium has got Selenium WebDriver, it has got Selenium IDE, it has got Selenium Grid, and it has got Selenium Remote Control. It had actually, but it's obsolete, it's deprecated now, but still it had. Now, there's so many tools in it. We've got these 4 components which will help us automate web browsers or web applications. It's open source. The biggest reason why people are preferring Selenium is this point. It is free of cost. It's open source. Now, even if I have to learn Selenium at home, I don't need any license to buy. For Q2P, you need a license. For Selenium, you don't need to buy any license. You can download Selenium jars on your personal desktop and start practicing. Start working with e-commerce websites or any website that's available on web. Whether you are in United States or in India or any part of the world, you can test the web applications on your own. So that's the biggest reason why people are preferring Selenium over other tools. It is open source and mainly used for functional testing and automation testing. So I'm sure you all must be aware about functional testing. So if you have to do, obviously this functional testing will also be automated. Okay, so writing functional testing and automation testing basically means that you can use Selenium to automate functional testing or regression testing. Supports different PL. PL means programming language. I'm now talking about other features of Selenium, okay, which again are the reasons of Selenium being dominant over other tools. It supports Java, Python, Perl, Ruby, C#, C, JavaScript, and I think a few must not be mentioned here. Supports different OS. So whether you talk about Linux, whether you talk about Windows, any version, whether you talk about Mac, whether you talk about iOS, whether you talk about Android, whether you talk about Ubuntu, all major operating systems are supported by Selenium. Supports different browsers. Now there are just 5 mentioned here, but all major browsers that are available in the market, Selenium has given support for all of them. So here we've got Internet Explorer, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, Opera. Now you have other browsers as well. Selenium is providing support for all of them. Now just imagine, even if you've got a system, okay, which has got Ubuntu. I'll give you an example. Now, generally, people don't use Ubuntu for their personal system as an operating system. But let's say you've got your office laptop, and that's what you have. You can carry it to your home, and Ubuntu is installed in it. But you have to practice Selenium at home. Leave about office, but you have to practice Selenium at home. Selenium is giving support for Ubuntu as well. You can run Selenium on Ubuntu as well. You've got Linux on your system. Selenium is giving it support. And let's talk about the programming languages also. Now, see, I understand that manual testers don't have any programming language knowledge, which is fine, guys, which is absolutely fine. Now, if you have to write, if you've chosen automation testing as your career choice, obviously you must have thought in your mind that you need to learn some programming language. You've got so many options. You can learn Java, you can learn Python, C#, PHP, Ruby, Perl, JavaScript, anything, and you can work with your Selenium scripts. Okay? All right. So let's say, okay, we've got some audience as well at the back end, and they want to understand the difference between functional testing and automation testing. Now, I think this line shouldn't be written this way, first of all, functional testing and automation testing, because you can automate anything. Anything as in you can automate functional testing and regression testing. Functional testing and automation testing. You can automate your functional testing as well. Now let's talk about functional testing because I understand you must be knowing what automation testing is. Let's talk about functional testing. Now regression testing, you know how we do regression testing. Functional testing is dividing your test cases on the basis of components or call flow. Your application could be of any type. It need not be an e-commerce necessarily. It can be any kind of web application, and there'll be some functions, there'll be some call flows. So functional testing will basically test those call flows. Let's say you are signing up. You're signing up on a web application. So the first thing that'll come on the application is the sign up form. Now you'll fill the sign up form. You'll submit it. That record will get stored in the database of that web application. Okay, and then maybe you'll get a prompt that your credentials or your details have been saved successfully. So that's a flow. Okay, filling the form, your details going back to the database, and something being returned. So I want to test that entire flow. So I can do that in functional testing. Okay, now when it comes to automation testing, you can automate functional testing and you can automate your regression test suite as well. Automation testing is that you have to write scripts to run some test cases. Now for this automation testing, you can have individual scripts for practicing, but when it comes to real time, you actually need to create automation test suite. Okay, and how do you create a test suite? By having frameworks or by taking frameworks into your project or creating frameworks. So we'll come to that framework part later. Let's go to the next slide. And I hope you've understood the features that make Selenium one of the best tools for automation testing. Advantages and disadvantages. So we are also mentioning the disadvantages here. Let's understand those as well. We'll talk about disadvantages first, and then we'll talk about advantages. Supports only web applications. Now, it doesn't support mobile applications, okay? It supports web applications, and it doesn't even support any desktop application. So that's there. Selenium only supports your web applications. Only user communities available. Now, people say that's a big drawback because if you talk about QTP and if you talk about other tools, all right, major tools that are being used in the market today for automation, they've got a dedicated support. Let's say for QTP, HP is giving a dedicated support for QTP. But here we don't have any dedicated society wherein we can put in our queries or, we can get a result or we can get an answer. We've got thousands of blogs. People have been working with Selenium for long now, and believe me, they've loved Selenium so much that they're writing their own blogs. They are creating their own web pages with the tutorials. So that's there. You will find knowledge. I mean, you'll find something on the web, but there's no dedicated society or community for it. Now, seleniumhq.org is one place where you can believe on the documentation because that's directly coming from the developers of Selenium. So you can trust that. But that's just the documentation. You won't find anything in detail or you won't find programming there. Difficult to set up and use. I don't find it difficult to set up and use, to be honest, but okay, let's say it's a disadvantage. I don't find it as a disadvantage, but let's say it's a disadvantage because if you're working with a programming language, okay, you need some development environment. Selenium doesn't provide any development environment, which means IDE, integrated development environment. So you need to use some other IDE, let's say Eclipse. So if you want to write your scripts in any IDE, you need to do some setup, which you'll have to do for any programming language. Okay, so that's there. You'll have to set up. You'll have to provide things wherein you can write your scripts. So difficult to set up and use. Why use? Because again, I believe that's the programming language thing. You need to have prior programming language knowledge. So be it Java, Python, Perl, Ruby, JavaScript, C Sharp, anything, you need to have knowledge of the programming language. No reporting facility. Now, I consider this as a disadvantage because in WebDriver, which is basically used by all the companies, we don't have any reporting facility here. You either need to include that reporting thing in your framework by automating this, or you'll have to use third-party tools like TestNG. So you'll integrate TestNG along with Selenium WebDriver to get the reports in HTML format probably. Okay, so we've got a question that doesn't support. All right, let me just read the question. So this is from our audience. So it says, when you said Selenium is used only for web testing and does not support mobile testing, how can it support Android and iOS operating systems? So I don't know why you've written iOS operating system, but when I'm saying that it doesn't support mobile applications, so you all know that mobile apps are different. I'm not saying that you cannot open any application on mobile and cannot test it. Okay, what I'm saying is you cannot use Selenium for mobile app testing. Of course, you've got a browser. You can open Chrome on your mobile as well. On that, you can do the testing. That I'm not denying. But if I have downloaded, let's say I've got some application, let's say I've downloaded Mintra, okay, anything as a mobile application that you cannot use, that you cannot test. We've got other tools like APM and stuff for doing that kind of testing. Okay. All right, limited support for image-based testing. Now you can take a screenshot using Selenium, that's there, but you cannot compare two images. Let's say for any kind of verification, you want to compare two images for verification. That is not there in Selenium. You of course can take screenshots, but you cannot compare two images. So these are the disadvantages. There are others as well, which are not listed here. We can talk about them when we'll face those issues while working through the entire course. Okay, these are the advantages. Let's go through them now. Open source software. The biggest reason why people prefer Selenium, or I also learned Selenium on my own. How did I do? I downloaded Selenium jars and I started working with them. And they were so interesting. I started practicing for hours because I could do that on my personal system. So that's the biggest reason people are preferring Selenium. It's free of cost. You can download Selenium jars on your system, import them in your project, and start working with them. Supports multiple programming languages. So we've already seen that point. You talk about Java, you talk about Ruby, Python, you talk about Perl, PHP, C Sharp. I hope I'm not missing anything. Any programming language. You talk about major programming language, and we've got support for it from Selenium. Next one, supports almost every operating system. So that I've already told you, whether you've got Ubuntu, whether you've got any version of Windows, whether you are using Mac, whether you're using Linux, you've got a support for it. Supports multiple browsers. So let's say you prefer to work with Chrome. Okay, that's your choice. And it's my choice as well. So your Selenium gives it support for it. Then somebody has a preference to use Firefox. You can work with it. You can work with Selenium on Firefox. Somebody has got a Mac system. Okay, you can work on Safari as well. Now we've got HTML unit. I'm not sure if you've heard about it or not. That's a headless browser, which doesn't have any GUI, graphical user interface. It's a headless browser. We call it headless browser, HTML unit. Okay, now Selenium supports this browser as well. So we've got support for all the major browsers available in the market. Supports parallel test execution. Now that's a whole concept in itself. I'm not going to take it in detail, but I'll just let you understand what parallel test execution means. Now this parallel test execution can also include the term called cross-browser testing. So parallel testing means you're running the same test case parallelly on different browsers. That's cross-browser testing. And you can call it parallel also because you're running the test cases parallelly. You can run different test cases parallelly on different instances of the same browser. Listen to me carefully, because parallel can be running test cases parallelly, but it depends on you how you want to run them, whether you want to run the same test cases on different browser or whether you want to run different test cases just to speed up on different instances of the same browser. So that's parallel testing, and we can achieve parallel testing by implementing TestNG along with Selenium WebDriver. We can achieve parallel testing by using grid also. So when I'll come to grid portion, I'll explain how beautiful it is when it comes to testing your test cases parallelly on different kinds of systems. When I say different kinds of system, it means having different operating system, different browsers. So that's another feature. Provide support for frameworks, TestNG, JUnit, and NUnit. So these are again testing frameworks. Okay. So when TestNG combined with Selenium WebDriver, it will take over the disadvantages. Majorly this one. We don't have any reporting facility. With TestNG, I can get well-formed HTML reports. Now, parallel execution, if I want to run my test cases parallelly, I can take help of TestNG. JUnit is again your Java unit testing framework. Okay, that's basically used by your developers for unit testing purpose. And NUnit is again the same thing like JUnit, but it's used for C, for a different language. So these two are basically used by developers for unit testing purpose. TestNG, which is called Test Next Generation, that's an advanced version, you can say, of JUnit with added features and functionalities. So when we'll come to TestNG, we'll take this in detail. Let's go to the next slide now. Selenium versus other tools. So here we will be discussing three different tools: QTP, IBM RFT, and Selenium, and we'll compare all of them on the basis of a few features. License. Required for QTP and IBM's RFT, Selenium is open source. So these 2 points, license and cost, they are interrelated because the major cost goes into licensing. See, all three of them are automation test tools. Okay, so when it comes to putting in the effort, or when it comes to using human resources, it's one and the same thing for all three of them. But when it comes to licensing, costing in terms of license, for both of them we need, but for Selenium, it's free of cost. So that's the reason cost is high here and less because it is open source. Customer support, we've already discussed this. For QTP and RFT, we've got dedicated HP support for QTP, and for RFT, we've got a dedicated IBM support. But Selenium is an open source community. We don't have any dedicated support. Hardware resource consumption during script execution, that's high here. Now, I haven't used QTP and RFT, so I really can't comment on this part, that how hardware resource consumption is high here. Okay, Selenium has always been my choice. I've always loved to work with Selenium. It's low here because all you need is your personal system as far as your hardware is concerned. Okay, and you need to have one IDE. That's it, and you can, and your programming language, of course, and you can start writing your scripts. Download your jars and start writing your scripts. So we don't need much, we just need one setup. That's your personal system, your PC or your laptop. Coding experience. It's not much for QTP. For RFT it is required, and for Selenium it should be really good. Should be very good, along with technical capabilities of integrating the framework. Now, integrating is the second thing. For even writing the scripts, you need to have programming language knowledge. So it's my advice that if you think that you want Selenium as your automation, as your career choice using Selenium, start working on your programming language concepts parallelly. That's very important. Environment support. We can run QTP only on Windows and RFT only on Windows. But look at this. Windows, any version of Windows, believe me. Linux, Solaris, and it says if browser or and JVM or JavaScript support exists. Now that's there. Obviously, we should have browser support for these operating systems. So there are just three mentioned here. You can have Mac, you can have Ubuntu. Okay? All the major operating systems are supported by Selenium. Language support. QTP, for this we need VB-script knowledge. For RFT, we need Java and C# knowledge. But if you want to write your scripts in Selenium, if you have knowledge in any of these programming languages, you can work with it. The features are so good that obviously anybody would love to work with it. This is not a drawback, open source community. It could be in a few scenarios in case of major bugs, okay, but I haven't felt that there's any major bug so far. I haven't come across any major bug here. But even if there's an open source community, believe me, you get the answers. Let's say you're stuck somewhere. You just Google it and you'll get millions of answers. So it could be a drawback, but not that major. And these points obviously are taking over QTP and RFT. Let's go to the next slide. Selenium suite of tools. We've got 4 components of Selenium here. Okay, IDE, RC, WebDriver, and Grid. And before I go ahead with this, let me just mention that RC has been deprecated. From Selenium 3 onwards, which is the latest version of Selenium, so there was a life cycle. Okay, we had Selenium 1, we had Selenium 2, and now it's Selenium 3. In Selenium 3, RC has been deprecated and has been moved to a legacy package. Okay, IDE, RC, WebDriver, and Grid. So version 1 had IDE, RC, and Grid. There was no WebDriver in Selenium 1. Version 2 had IDE, RC, WebDriver, and Grid. Version 3, IDE, RC, WebDriver, and Grid, but then you can consider it not being there as well because it's been deprecated now. We've mentioned this here for the reason that there might be people around the world who are still using RC, but that's moved to a legacy package now. All right. I've never used RC. I've been using Selenium for a long time now, but then I never used RC. So it's been years people gave up on RC because of its drawbacks. So I'll come to that when we'll discuss the difference between RC and WebDriver. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so that's about IDE. Selenium IDE is a Firefox plugin which is used to create and execute test cases. IDE is Integrated Development Environment. And if you read this line carefully, it's a plugin which comes only for Firefox, which is used to create and execute test cases. So you can create and execute test cases here. I'll just quickly give you a demonstration. Let's go through the slide now. It records and plays back the interactions with the user, which the user had with the web browser. Record and play. We also call it a record and play tool. Why? Because let's say you open up this plugin and you're working on any web application. Whatever you're doing on a web application, it gets recorded as the steps inside this IDE. So that's called recording. Now you can play back these steps again. So we've got these two buttons. If you can see here, there's a green button here with a single hash, and there's one with 3. So that's for a single test case, and that's for a test suite. Okay, we can run these steps again using these buttons. So I'll just demonstrate that in a few moments. Using IDE, you can export the programming code in different languages. Now that's a good feature in IDE. I don't prefer to use IDE. I'll tell you about that, why I don't prefer using IDE. But yes, this is a good feature. Let's say for syntaxing, or let's say for prototyping, you want to understand how should I write a code for executing a test case in Selenium. Execute the same test case using Selenium IDE, record these steps, okay, and then we've got an export feature here using which you can export these steps in a programming language format. So you'll get the entire script in that particular language that you choose. So no. So we've got a question, can't we use Selenium IDE in Chrome? No, you can't use. That's a Firefox plugin. It comes only as a plugin for Firefox and not any other browser. All right? Okay, so let me quickly check what is there in the next slide, and then I'll give you a demonstration. So these are the features. Before I come to the features part, now let's quickly see what IDE is. So I'll just open up my Firefox now. Now, first of all, I'll tell you how to get IDE, okay? Don't go here and go to plugins for getting IDE. Please don't do that. What I want you to do is just write down, or maybe you can directly go to seleniumhq.org, okay? This is the link which you can support for documentation, which you can trust for documentation. Go to this one, because all the documentation here, it's coming directly from the Selenium developer. So it's trustworthy. Now go to download here. And you might just have to scroll down a bit to find IDE. Okay, it's right here. Now can you see that Selenium IDE? Download latest released version from addons.mozilla.org. So you're supposed to get IDE from this link and not through the menu here. Click here. It says add to Firefox. I already have it, so I'm not going to click on add to Firefox. If you want to get Selenium IDE in your Firefox, just click on this button. It might ask you to restart Firefox, restart, and you'll get an icon looking like this. Can you see here? That's Selenium IDE. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on it. A plugin window will get opened up. So that's exactly what we just saw inside the slide. This is another window. It's a plugin for Firefox. Okay. You have this record button which is already enabled. If you can read it, now recording, click to stop recording. That means whatever you'll do on your Firefox browser, this tool or this plugin is going to record it in steps. And then these are the buttons to